it looks like September 9th, we're going to have Tiffany Portis talking about leading as an introvert. So we hope you're able to join us for that. Stay tuned for information. And with that, we're just going to turn it over to Mirsha, who also happens to be one of our co-leaders. This was all planned before she became a co-leader, but we're really excited to have her here. She's so much knowledge on this topic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kristi.
Thanks, and apologies in advance because I made some last minute changes recently and I broke my chronic rule of test your timing out. So we may run a little bit over or under. I hope we'll get close to it, but apologies in advance. All right. So a little bit about me. I work for a little company called Kent Corporation that has about 2,000 employees spread across 20 states and 7 countries. I work for the headquarters, which is located in Iowa, although most of the time I work remote. I'm very fortunate like that. We have several smaller companies, and if you live in the US, it's a safe bet that you and possibly your pet have consumed something we make, because we make a lot of base products for other companies as well as our own. At Kent, I'm the chief data architect for the company, and I'm on the analytics data management team. And by chief, I really mean only data architect, but our team is always pulled in for any enterprise level Synapse or Fabric data project. I'm very fortunate to be part of a great team, and I'm not just saying that because one of my team members are here, surprisingly. I get to do what I love every day, which is solve puzzles, build and destroy things, and learn new stuff and help others. I'll only hit a few highlights here on my slide because let's face it, you aren't really here to learn about me, hopefully. I'm neurodiverse. I do like to call that out because it's important to, and I'm going to put my other co-worker's dad joke in here, normalize it. But also I tend to hold off on any questions to the end or they derail me on my time management. So apologies in advance. My last slide will have ways to contact me if we run out of time. And I can answer one of the questions now, hopefully, and that's yes, these slides will be available for download. So here is the agenda. We're going to talk about why. Why is this important? This is always a good starter for me. It justifies me being here. And more importantly, it lets you know from the get-go if this is the place you should be. Architectural patterns. We're going to talk about some basics, medallion architecture, data mesh, and domains, and in the context of organizing your artifacts. Naming conventions. This is where things start to get a little chaotic in my experience, but setting standards for naming conventions, you are going to make your life easier and other people's lives easier down the road. Lastly, we're going to talk about security setups. We will talk about some specific use cases on how to set up your security groups for different scenarios. What this presentation is not. Even though a lot of this presentation is about data governance topics, I'm not going to talk to you about how you should look up things in Purview or Copilot. These have additional costs that not everyone has access to, and so they're not really going to be part of this presentation. Most of the things are not a page here in Microsoft, are not something you can find in Microsoft Learn, and we're not going to get into nitty-gritty things like workspace identities or things like that. There may be a little bit of stuff on here about it, like RBAC, but for the most part, this isn't a rehash of what you can find there. It's more about building a framework so that people who follow it will know what the thing is, who uses the things, and why the thing is in the place it is in. Obviously, I can't cover every single use case for every company. My hope is that this gives you enough information to realize the importance and make you look like a hero when you go back to your boss and say, hey, we have some things we need to nail down. Lastly, I'm not here to try to cram every data architectural pattern into a 1-hour session. First of all, I don't know everyone. And second of all, there isn't enough time for that. We're going to talk about the medallion architecture and data mesh and domains in the context of organizing your artifacts. We're not going to talk about naming conventions for tables, columns, etc. There's a lot of information already out there on that, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of what this presentation is about. All right, so let's get started. We'll start with why. Security and governance concerns are a top reason most projects are not adopted or they fail. If you fail to plan, you will fail, or you're going to at least end up revising a bunch. whether or not you're planning to use fabric as a self-service tool, and I guarantee you someone somewhere in your company has watched a marketing video that touting to do that. I'll bet some of them are in the C-suite. The very nature of self-service means if you don't put in standards, then you will be opening a Pandora's box. So if you're not implementing some of the things we're talking about today, then it will be really hard to do the cleaning up later. 2, there's no playbook. When I was trying to get a handle on specific recommendations for fabric, when our company started with it, I found that there was no hard and fast recommendations from Microsoft. And that's probably for a really good reason. It's the classic, it depends. My hope with this presentation is that it will give you enough guidance to develop one that works best for your company, or just completely use what I put here and build from there. I'm not going to tell anybody, so do what works easiest for you. 3, I said there's no playbook, but that isn't exactly true. There are lots of playbooks for things that are used in fabric. And elsewhere. Different personas may have hard and fast rules, but you will find that as the artifacts start to converge under one umbrella of fabric, that many of these recommendations that people have used classically in other environments will start to conflict. Not to mention new IT professionals that are starting from scratch need a little bit more guidance. It's important for your company and probably your sanity to develop these governance planning tasks as soon as possible. The earlier, the better. Trust me from experience. And number 4, monitoring. This is for all you admins out there. When you're monitoring some of this stuff, it gets super chaotic. Having the naming conventions, the security, the organization really, really helps get that in a line, easy to read for you. So when the fabric, a little note on that monitoring part, when fabric admins, troubleshooters, or monitors, and many auditors start looking at what might be causing their problems, it's going to be tough if you're at an enterprise level. In this screenshot, it doesn't look like it's too difficult, but if you've ever dug into one of these activities, like a pipeline, or even if you're trying to develop a data catalog for data governance, or a report to track who's driving up your CUs, and with fabric, that starts getting really important. You're going to see really quick how important it is to have these systems in place. If you're familiar with the FUAM, FUM development or deployment or similar, which I highly recommend, then you'll see from domains to security to why naming conventions and why all of these things are really important. And I didn't mean for that to not be static, so apologies. I'll have to fix that. So architectural patterns. Let's talk about domains first. Domains are a great way to organize your content in Fabric. This allows users to be able to filter on content specific to a domain. And as we'll see later, it can help you with monitoring, security, and many other things. You're not limited to setting these up as perspectives, as you can see here. I have a domain I use I call Sandbox because I do a lot of sandbox work across projects. And sometimes I only want to see my sandbox stuff instead of the gazillion other workspaces in my dropdown. You aren't limited to perspectives. Like you see here on the 3 sales, inventory, and finance, but they are helpful for data mesh, which we'll talk about in just a second. If you have multiple companies, then you can even set this up by company. But with the advent of tags now in Fabric, I'm going to suggest that you save things that fall along those lines to tags and keep your domains to perspectives like you see with these last 4 here. There'll be exceptions and you can address them as they come, but you will start to see as you build these out, and if you build that in at the get-go, you're going to save yourself a lot of headache down the road. You can also have subdomains to a domain. I don't have them listed here, but you may have something that finance has accounts payable and accounts receivable subdomains. And that's because accounts payable and accounts receivable people sometimes want to see different things, or there may be security concerns, or there may be region concerns. So that helps you there. which means you need to consider if your domains, when you're building this out, you need to consider whether your domains really roll up logically to a parent as you're creating them. If you mess up, it's not a big deal. You can go back and fix it. But just the more you know at the beginning, the easier it's going to be for you down the road. Data mesh. There are different types of data mesh architectures. You can follow governed mesh, hybrid mesh, and federation, full mesh federation, and that's a little bit beyond the scope of this. But the idea is different domains in a company have different requirements. And past having quality data, they don't want a singular IT team being the bottleneck for their progress. So this is why domains tie in nicely that we just talked about with the data mesh design. But I will say when moving along the area of data mesh, proceed with caution. You may have things that overlap, so you'll need to think of what to do when this occurs. What do you do when finance and sales has, exact same things that they want to look at? Some of this, what do you do when they have, common things? So the examples may be of those common things. Examples may be date or currency artifacts. And when domains may be part of a hierarchy, like the sales and the finance or sales and marketing, that have shared resources that are specific to them, but only to them, what are you going to do? Sales and marketing domains tend to have a lot of overlap, but HR won't follow under that same umbrella. So this is particularly important once you get into security, which we'll discuss in a bit. Just knowing that this, going back to the last slide, as you're planning data mesh, take it into considerations of those domains, and do any of those domains have a hierarchy to them? Architectural patterns. We're going to talk for a second about medallion architecture, because how you design your medallion architecture, which is extremely common in fabric, has different considerations. The medallion architecture, for the purposes of time, I'm going to give you the quick 100 feet up overview so you can get an idea of what you need to consider when you're planning. If you're familiar with ETL architecture from on-prem scenarios, a lot of these concepts are going to seem really familiar. So bronze layer, you bring the data in with as little changes as possible. This is an unaltered raw data. And on-prem, you probably had a database where you pulled data in and it persisted in tables. And fabric, you typically would put this in a lakehouse where it may or may not be persisted, depending on if you're using shortcuts or not. Silver layer, this is your staging area. On-prem people know this to be staging tables that work with those raw data tables. Old school people probably had some SSIS package that transferred the raw tables to the staging tables, or maybe a little bit less old. Somebody used Azure Data Factory. Now we have Fabric. So this layer is typically for standardizing names, removing unneeded columns, and adding some filters and joins if needed. Our gold layer, and on-prem, this was typically your end data warehouse. I think most people on this call probably are familiar with that. That's not to be confused with the many ways that Fabric uses the term warehouse. I'm using it in the strictest sense. For those not familiar, these are the tables that have been remodeled as a star schema, your fact and dimension tables. So right now that we know the basics down, why am I talking about it? Well, you'll need to decide how you want to store your layers. There's several ways you can do this. You can store it all in one lakehouse and break it up by schema or with certain naming conventions. Or like you see a lot in on-prem, you use two lakehouses, a raw staging database and a data warehouse. I can't really recommend those two options for any large-scale project or a project that needs scalability, but it's all you need for small projects or proof of concept projects. It's probably not a pilot project if your end result is going to be a large enterprise level project. So what are your other options? These are the two. You can also put, well, there's many more, but for simplicity's sake, you can also put each layer into its own lakehouse, which is what you see surrounded by that green box. That would be the 3 lakehouses inside one workspace, Or at the very bottom, you'll see you can even divide them up by workspaces. There's not really one way that works best for all scenarios. As you make these considerations, the things you need to know is performance, security, scalability, complexity, and design, and what your company's requirements or project even are for each. From a Microsoft recommendation standpoint, they recommend you put them in separate workspaces. But at the time that recommendation came, they hadn't really developed a way for those workspaces to talk to each other easily. Now there are some methods available, but it adds layers of complexity that may not be worth it to you. And that complexity will grow as your solution grows. So when making that decision, how do I want this one lake house and one workspace, 3 lake houses in one workspace, or 3 lake houses in 3 workspaces? Make sure you understand what that involves for your specific project. Here's an example of them all in one workspace, and in fact, in a subfolder, as you see at the top, lake houses. In my experience, I like having the 3 layers in one workspace for large projects. This makes it easier to design notebooks that can easily see each other. And pipelines. I don't have to do workarounds with SQL endpoints and pipelines and crazy stuff like that I would have to do if they were in separate workspaces. If you're using some sort of meta-driven orchestration database, then this is going to be a lot less jumping through hoops. The downside, though, and there's always a downside, now you have to deal with a different security scenario. And Fabric currently does not have a native way to look at your security across workspaces or from an object perspective, unless you click on one object at a time, which is a lot. So that's a major drawback. You could always shell out more money, time and learning for Purview or something custom built, but it's important that you know these things going in and what your project's tolerance level is for this. If you do go this route, and right now it's the route we've chosen for our major D365 project, I would suggest that you look into the free FUAM admin tool that Microsoft has now taken under their wing. It's really great and fairly easy to install and customize. Lots of info there for you to explore about what's going on in your tenant. I use it daily, and I haven't even explored a fraction of the different reports of information it supplies to us. So this is a great segue for me, not just to talk about the FUAM, and I never know how to pronounce FUAM, but to show you an example of how things can get a bit unwieldy looking. This is the workspace that it installs to. There are, and I couldn't even show it in one entire slide, there are about 40 to 50 objects in one workspace, and they don't even color code them differently. And yes, I could filter the types by keyword like report in the highlighted filtered area, but sometimes I'm flipping between a lot of projects all day and having to remember to either put a filter on, or in my case, a lot of times I forget to take it off and I say, hey, where's all my stuff? It's something I don't like to do and would rather have some sort of organization in place. Enter in folders. For me, this is much more organized than what we just formerly saw. Pipelines go in the pipeline folder, notebooks in the notebook folder. We have them numbered by, whatever you determine should be the numbering order. And I know exactly where to go for what I'm looking for. Like I said before, there's always a downside. And the downside here is that new artifacts are currently placed in the root location in your workspace. You can move them to the right folder immediately after creation, but it is, a bit of a pain. Huge, small, but why? You can be inside a notebook that's in your notebook subfolder, like the 02 here, and put save a copy, and you're gonna have to go back out of your folder because it's gonna dump it in the root. Hopefully they will fix that, but maybe they think it's a feature and not a bug. By the way, this is one of the things that's not something you need to decide at a company-wide level. Different people may have different preferences for their own projects, and there's nothing you really need to set in stone here. This is just one of those few things that if you don't have you don't have to decide up front, but it's good to know the option going in so you can have that organization if that's something you feel can get unwieldy. We talked about domains and mesh and medallion architecture, but no, you don't. But no, you do have the option of combining them. You usually see them talked about one way or the other. If you have your medallion architecture in one workspace, this may be a really good way to get around some of that messy security issues I talked about before that happens when you have it in one workspace. This has, in this graph, it has the medallion architecture at the center with common domain that holds objects different business units all use, and then individual domains that have their own individual workspaces. By having those different semantic models in a workspace in the individual business unit domain, you can then put the security permissions at that level for all the different roles. This also helps protect kind of your core data platform better and allows you to see who may be using more compute, more features, and any other number of things. It also makes the central team that may be managing that medallion layer not the bottleneck for domains to do more self-exploration within their own domain. Naming conventions. So why are naming conventions important? Gives people information they need. Wait, what is that? Warm and fuzzy HR gobbledygook you're trying to sell me? No, I'm not. It's not gobbledygook. Even if you are a one-man shop, I guarantee if you don't set up some sort of naming convention up in advance, ask me how I know, you are going to have some things like unit of conversion measure and unit of measure conversion and have to go through hopefully well-commented and marked up code to find what the heck the difference is. Super important. Portability. You want to minimize cross-platform problems. You want to put that Spark SQL code in SSMS or VS Code to run against your Lakehouse because you have to have your setup exactly how you want it there. It's going to be a real pain if different people use different case collations in the notebook, although I will note just recently Fabric has added collations. Yay! And in the notebook, and then put the Lakehouse table in all caps when it's actually all lowercase. Believe me, people can put in extra things all over the place. You can put things in to make it work in your Spark notebook that will make it not work other places. So you really need to have these naming conventions to be able to have that cross portability, or you're going to have, boom, you're going to have to rewrite hundreds of lines of code because of some case sensitivity issue. 3, monitoring. Monitor all the things. Life's so much easier when you're troubleshooting or auditing or any number of things you would do reporting on about the system. If you can easily identify what the artifact is, you can get to the troubleshooting of it much faster. Naming conventions. So first we'll talk about artifacts, the different types of artifacts. This is not a full and complete list. By the way, I did put the little monster there because I realized when I was trying to put another people person under the technologist artifacts, it just made it weird. So I went the all weird side. But what does this mean? What is this about? So data literacy and data governance rely on accurate, meaningful names for data. But most of the naming conventions focus on syntax alone, and that's a problem. What is useful for a data engineer will be very perplexing to a report consumer or a data analyst. Identify the artifacts you currently use and ones you will potentially use in the near future. Then set your naming convention fit accordingly. What do I mean by that? Well, if I'm designing a notebook, then I'm going to use a long technical name that is composed of things like NB-dynamic-200-silver-clean_inventdim. But a user doesn't want to see a report called REPT-300-gold-customers abandoned cart. They want their app or report called a predetermined name that someone probably from the sales domain decided it should be. So we want to first identify where we use user-friendly names and where we have to follow specific rules. Naming conventions are often too cryptic for user-facing artifacts, so the average person wants to see those easily identifiable names. Same for workspaces, which most of the time are used by both types of people. So step one here is to identify what needs to be user-friendly names, what can be at the discretion of the workspace, but don't come crying to us later if they get crazy with it, and what really has to have a more disciplined approach. Let's start with the core component you need in Workspace to do all the things a workspace. This is one of the few places that I found is really hard to set up hard and fast rules, but there are still going to be some guidelines that I'm going to suggest, particularly if you're a growing company. Pulling up all of your workspaces and seeing a prefix of WS underscore or suffix of underscore workspaces, which I've actually seen in some things online for naming conventions for Fabric when I first started out. That is kind of a useless scenario, even for auditing, because most of the auditing native capabilities include the workspace type, or it's really workspace type focused. So just seeing all that WS or workspace in the workspace name becomes just a repeatable thing that has no value. What you want to do is make sure you have value to your company. This is one way you can set up your workspace naming so you don't have workspaces named something like Christie's Test Area 99, not having any idea what the other 98 Christie test areas are about. My neurospicy brain usually does not like coming up with names all on my own. There's too many. When I have too many options, it's really bad for me. So set up your guidelines up front. Again, these are suggestions to get you started on thinking about what works best for your company, because not one thing is going to apply for everyone. In this example, we've developed the rule project plus region plus environment. You will also notice I included brackets. You don't have to, of course, but I think it makes it look a lot cleaner when you see the name in those examples below. You won't have them color-coded, unfortunately. If you're going to do some cataloging in a format that may not play nice with brackets, then I'd leave them out. But we've used them with API calls, notebooks, pipelines, and we've not had any problems with the brackets so far. And it really does kind of set those items apart that you may want set apart. Project is a component. I think it's pretty self-descriptive. My advice here is to keep it concise. Leave the super long names for the description area. Region. This can be useful in some scenarios. If you only have one region, then it's not needed, but maybe you have multiple regions with projects that have the same name. And this is an easy add to help make the workspace name unique in those cases. Environment, this is a big one for me. When you start getting in deployment pipelines, you want easy peasy ways to know which one goes where in that pipeline. And if you don't break things out by different environments ever, which you should consider it in many cases, then that means they would all fall into production. Workspace example 2. In this example, I've actually put something in here that I don't normally use, and I'll let you guess which one it is while I continue talking. If you have multiple companies, then on occasion you will find the need to add it to your workspace name. Here we've said it's optional, and again, these are just guidelines because maybe some of your workspaces apply to all of your companies. So in that case, you might want to add it. Making it optional gives that flexibility here. The project component, that again gives the person looking at the workspace names information to help them know exactly where to go. If you guessed domain earlier as the one that I don't use, then you guessed correctly. To me, that's covered by setting up domains, but maybe you want to do it to get your feet wet with domains without having any extra overhead. It's easy enough to change a workspace name down the road if you decide you don't want it. A reason some people may use it if you have duplicate names for other components, and it helps it to make it unique. And lastly, our upfront environment. This gives you the added benefit, beside what I previously mentioned, of grouping your workspaces together because they do list them alphabetically when you do the dropdown. And it's nice to have all your different environments together. So what else? Apps and reports will usually be defined by someone else, thankfully. Apps will still gain the benefit by adding environment tag as a suffix, so consider it. But definitely do not add the environment suffix to reports. In fact, you shouldn't really do it with any other artifact because it won't work once you stick it in a deployment pipeline like you see here. These names need to be the same. In a deployment pipeline, all of your artifact names have to be the same to flow to the next environment. Here you see the components in the bottom all have the same name, but the highlights show you how easy it is to match the correct workspace that we talked about earlier when we added that environment tag to the workspace to the correct deployment and environment stage. This is really nice because it just gets confusing when you're doing the drop down to select where you want to put each one. Even if you don't use deployment pipelines, they're lovely. You really should. You probably will at some point, so keep that in mind. Having to do a mass change of names for each artifact is going to be a big headache. So please, please, please don't add them to your other artifacts. Just make it a practice not to do it from the get-go. Now that you have your workspace and user-friendly artifacts squared away, let's move on to the bulk of other facts. I can't talk. Other artifacts. This is a partial list of what I use, and I'll make the full list available for those interested. But each artifact to me needs to either have a short abbreviated or an NA if I don't really want it to apply, that you can go back to and refer to, and everybody can be using the same thing. For instance, I'm not where I'd use NA. I'm not going to add REPT to all my reports. That one doesn't need a short abbreviation. Some people may want to because they only expose reports via an app. So that goes back to know what your company wants to do. You give your user-friendly name there, but maybe it's a pretty big blend and it's not practical for our company, but I can see how it can be practical for others. Now, this shortened list, and I have a full list. Where did I get these artifacts? And in fact, some of them on my list are brand spanking new in preview. In Fabric sidebar, if you go into it, you'll notice a button called Workload. This is what Fabric used to call Experiences. That will give you the current artifacts that are available, so you can kind of always stay up to date. As new ones come on, you can add them. I suspect I'll need a good old-fashioned mapping column for when they change the name of things, because Microsoft loves to change the name of things. What does this component give me? This is why you're doing it. It gives me a way to easily identify what something is in multiple scenarios, and as it helps to keep things easily organized. And as you'll see in a minute, much like our workspace rules, it gives us a way to clarify and document our rules and examples. So those component abbreviations you'll now see as part of our rules that we use, that we hand to everybody else. This is our rule. Here are some examples of rules you can use for notebooks and pipelines. No, I didn't spill Skittles on my laptop, at least not today. I've color-coded these so you can match those components to the example. For space reasons, I didn't include the required, not required fields like I did earlier for the workspaces, but that would certainly be something you would add to the standards documentation. For those of you wondering about the medallion layer index here in gold, that's an easy way to make sure that they are ordered by layer in Fabric, because if you think about alphabetically, bronze, silver, gold is not alphabetically in order. And lots of people like to have that 100, 200, 300 in order for those layers. For those of you with a super eagle eye of the differences with hyphens and underscores, that comes to a personal preference of differentiating different components with name that may have multiple words, like load customer. So at the top rule, we have an example for a notebook. Let's see if I can pull this, the NB here, notebook. This is something optional that we use optional. We sometimes like to define if this notebook is a dynamic thing, is it static, or is it ad hoc? Ad hoc is usually going to be something that we use outside of a pipeline. Dynamic and static are ones we tend to use inside pipelines. Again, that medallion medallion layer index, the medallion layer. This notebook obviously is specific to our medallion layer. You don't have to include those if that's not part of your notebook, of course. And then so it would be listed as optional. And then, of course, you want to put your purpose. And this purpose of the notebook, it is to load a customer. You have the similar rules down at the pipeline. You're going to have your component type abbreviation that we had on the previous page. Again, the dynamic, static, ad hoc, optional, medallion layer index, medallion layer purpose. In this case, it's a D365. We used a source here. That's why we say purpose or source, because sometimes we just want to know the source. And then sometimes you have different pipelines that are parent, child, grandchild, things like that. And you're going to want to add that. Again, these are just examples. You don't have to follow it exactly. But the whole purpose of why I'm putting this up here is to get you thinking in the idea of having repeatable rules that apply to your company's flow of business. Looking at all this, you may wonder why so cryptic. By using all lowercase, no spaces or hyphens or underscores for non-facing usernames, we're actually following Microsoft's recommendation that matches well with Azure naming components. The exception is lake houses, as they do not allow hyphens. Here's the lake house exception. I'm not going to walk through each component. You can easily see, and as I said, I'll make these slides available afterwards. We can't use hyphens in lake houses, so we use underscores. In warehouses, we have an unusual situation. I think you'll also find it with some Spark stuff of a 31 character limit. So we use a project workspace abbreviation instead of the entire workspace, or instead of the entire project name. So kind of what is that? What do we want to summarize that as? Use project names, abbreviations, component types, whether something is dynamic, static, ad hoc. Consider using medallion index and layer, definitely purpose, and potentially domain if it applies. Be very aware of including environment as part of the name. It works. You do want to do it with workspaces. You don't want to do it for your notebooks. Be aware of duplicate abbreviations for different types, right? We talked about NB for notebook. Make sure you're not using something NB for something else. And by the way, I will have that Excel sheet that has each current component as of, I think, yesterday. If you want to just download that and get started from there. Be aware of space limitations and also hyphen restrictions. Security group use cases. Lastly, I want to talk a bit about setting up security groups. There is enough different concepts in Fabric to make its own session. So I'm not going to go through security in general, but I want to specifically address how you organize your security groups for maximum effectiveness. Those of you familiar with Entra security in Azure are familiar with RBAC roles, role-based access control. We also use that in Fabric. But usually it's not as simple as setting up workspace admin, member, contributor, and viewer. As your work in Fabric grows, and you may already be encountering this, you need to identify different use cases, scenarios for how security will be used. Specifically, what groups you can identify that will be reused over and over. Recalling our conversations about data mesh and domains, you may start to see a pattern with some of your users. Your report consumers all have the same access, viewing in your app, maybe occasionally in your workspace. You will usually see this fall along the lines of domain, or some call it perspectives. An example of this is finance or inventory or sales. When we started our journey at Kent into Fabric, even more so in Power BI, though it certainly can be used there, I noticed this specific use case was becoming our nominal case that we needed to make considerations for. Domain combined with a job role. And what this buys you is way more flexibility, particularly at the object level. Maybe I'm a developer or on the finance team, but as the data architect, I don't want that developer mucking around in my silver layer, because then I'm explaining ETL logic all day. So I only give that group of people SQL endpoint access. And by having them all in one group, that makes it easier for me. You can start to apply these groups at the workspace level, object level, and OneLake security level. A quick walkthrough of the rule here. Prefix it that with SG simply stands for security group. There's nothing really fancy about that, and it's a standard Azure thing. Security admins like things easily identifiable with rules as well. So if they're not using SG, just check what their setup is, but it's common to add. Solution is also a very common thing to add as well as part of the intra name. So security group or SG-fabric is what we're using here. And then this nominal case that I'm seeing over and over adds the domain or perspective, whichever you like to call it. But since we're using domains at the beginning of the slideshow, we're going to say domain, followed by the job role. Adding them all into a group makes it easier for you. If someone needs to be added or removed, that's handled through your security team. You've already added the security group to where it applies. So they just have to go, ask the security team or the app admins, hey, I need this person removed or added, and it applies to everywhere that person may be. Or that group, sorry. Use case 2. Occasionally, we may have groups that are based more along the lines of environment and project. My dev testers for a project might be completely different than my QC testers. These are generally a much smaller group than an entire domain, and sometimes it's a subset of that previous group we just mentioned in use case 1, but they may differ by project, so you need to make exception rules for that. Again, this allows you to get out of it every time someone is added or removed from a project scenario. They're bugging the security team, not you. Sorry, security team people that may be on this call. Use case 3. Our team is not the only team that uses Fabric, but we are the team that sets standards and is who people come to if they have questions. In general, we will also set up workspaces for others, but we are always involved in what goes on in the workspace. In this case, a project may want to pull us in to specifically assist. Yes, now we normally, as a Fabric admin, I can go into the admin portal and assign myself to the workspace. That's a lot of extra steps. I want to make sure we have a way to add a specific group and take it away that's easily identifiable by those requesting assistance. So say, Sally over on my sales team has a workspace project. And she's the admin of that workspace. I'm going to ask her to go ahead and add our workspace admin group to her workspace. So then our entire team that is part of that group can join in and assist. And it's not just for our team. You could easily have use cases where people are co-collaborating. So that's why this specific use case may apply. This use case started happening more and more here at Kent, and I don't see it going away. I only see it expanding to other groups. So a use case you should consider. Thus, we want to align this requirement by using RBAC as part of our naming convention. Again, that workspace admin, workspace contributor, workspace member, workspace viewer. That's a very specific thing that everybody who looks at the security group will know what it is. And lastly, use case 4, we have contractor groups that come in or external users often that need to be added to a completely separate group. This is because those external users may have work in other projects. You want to be able to be flexible enough and have full visibility to those external groups. You don't want to add them into your regular groups, particularly if you see yourself adding and removing the groups in an entirety to a workspace. Maybe you've had a consultant group come in, they helped you get things set up, and now you want them, out of there. Maybe they're working on a different team. This one gets a little bit more complicated As sometimes we have people that, well, maybe they finished with our project, but they're working with, another team on their project. So it's not that their name would go away out of the system, but you may want to remove that group out of your workspace specifically. And by having them in their own individual groups, this meets that requirement. This really follows that best practices of designing a group by least privilege and being able to remove and add groups as needed. How are we on time? Looks like we're pretty good, actually. Key takeaways. Too many organizations are lured in by the shiny presentations that talk about, look how easy this is, and the importance of democratizing data. But the reality is, we got to keep that Pandora's box closed. There's a lot of pre-planning you need to do as early as possible. Choose your domains. Setting that up from the get-go makes life easier. It's not set in stone. You can change it. That's totally fine. But it gets you a good base to start off with. Deciding where and how your architecture will be. Are you using Medallion? Are you using Mesh? Are you using something else? How are you setting those workspaces up? Are they all in different ones? Are they in one workspace? Do you have it in one lake house? Do you have it in 2 lake houses? Do you have it in 3? Those are really important decisions you have to make up front before you even get into anything else. And they each has its pros and cons. So going back and figuring out what this might be is pretty vital when you get down to the end line and all of a sudden you have, hey, this workspace can't talk to that workspace type problems. Design naming standard rules with examples and document them. That's pretty important because if everybody is following the same thing, you don't have things left over like version 1, version 2, version 3. You don't have things that somebody else comes in and says, what am I looking like? I don't even know what this is supposed to do. If you have rules and they're documented, then everybody knows exactly what each thing does. And it's very easy on the admin side to start understanding how to monitor those and what's going on with each one. You can make, as a data architect, I can look and see, oh, you know what, this notebook is taking a lot of time, a lot of CUs, we may have to go up to the next capacity, or the semantic model is, let's see what's going on there. I can now pinpoint and go and say, hey, this notebook historically has been doing this and it's using a large table. That's fine. Okay, great. If it's loading some inventory, huge transaction table, that kind of makes sense. It uses a lot of CUs. But if my semantic model that is really small is using a lot of CUs, now I'm going to know if I look at that name, I know, hey, that's normally pretty small. What's going on there? Oh, well, I've gone in there and I've seen there's some things that can be fixed and cleaned up and look a lot nicer. And it lets everybody kind of follow the same playbook and do the same thing, which becomes a repeatable process, which means anybody walking in the door, brand new people, will know what things are and what they should be doing. Then lastly, realize your use cases for how different people will interact with data. I gave you 4 use cases. Maybe they don't apply to you. Maybe there's something else that works. And the point of this was not to give you a strict, hard and fast rule, but it is to give you a foundation so you can go back and say, well, how does my company interact with data? How do my people interact with that data? And let's go back and work with the security team and set up a standard for my various use cases that we can have going forward. And that just makes the management side of your artifacts and the security to them way easier, because gosh knows right now natively with inside of Fabric, not with Purview and not with other tools that have been custom built, there's not really a great way to track some of that. Now, I did mention the Flume app, and there's a lot of things you can do in there to pull some of that information out. But that falls along the lines of time, money, and all of those things that you'll have to do. So having those use cases set up front is going to really assist with some of that admin duties. All right, so that's a lot. And I did do good on time, so I'm really happy because I did not do my timing great before. Do we have any questions?
So unfortunately, chat was disabled. We're not sure why. We did see that comment. I think, Fernanda, you had mentioned that. I don't know if he's still there or not, but this would be a good time, since chat's not working, if you want to unmute and ask any questions. The reminder is this will be posted to YouTube, so you'll be able to get her contact information later if needed, and we can go from there. But are there any questions? So definitely a lot of good information. So thank you so much, Kristy, for that. A lot of good things about naming conventions. We forget how important those basics are, but it really makes a difference.
Yeah, and if anybody has thinks up questions as they're going down this road, it's a lot. I know. Trust me, I know. If you have questions later, reach out to me on Blue Sky or LinkedIn.